Hello, everybody, and welcome to Assembly Update. I'm Ted Flint. With us today, Assemblyman Michael Norris, who serves District Number 144, the counties Erie, Niagara, and Orleans. Assemblyman Norris, good to see you as always.
Ted, it's great to see you. I'm always glad to be on the show.
Let's begin talking about taxes. I know a lot of people don't want to talk about taxes, but I mean, in New York State especially, they're inevitable and they're high in New York State. According to the Tax Foundation, New York has the worst tax freedom day in the country. I'll give you the stats here. Individual income taxes, New York ranks 48th. Sales tax rates, 43rd. Property tax rates, 45th. I know you've been fighting since you've been here in Albany to lower those tax rates. Give me your response.
Well, that's why people are leaving the state of New York, because they cannot afford to be here and they cannot afford to pay the taxes here in the state of New York. And we saw this recently with the loss of a congressional representative in Congress. You know, I spoke with many people, including Mr. Goodell, who is our floor leader, Assemblyman Andy Goodell from Jamestown. He's a little older than I am, and he remembers. He says, you know, he recalls a time when we had over 40 members of Congress representing the people of the city of New York. Now, currently, we have 27. We're going to be going on 26. This is because of the high cost of doing business here and the tax and spend policies that the downstate driven majorities continue to push. And, you know, as we talked about this state budget in the last show, $212 billion, an increase of $34 billion in spending. And when we pushed back and we said, yes, you know, President Biden and the congressional delegation provided stimulus package money here, over $12 billion, that most of that money went into regular programming, increased regular program. How that we're going to be able to afford that long term is absolutely beyond me. But we have to go back to the basics. We have to control spending in the state of New York. We need to reform completely our social services budget, where we have over $85 billion in spending every year. It might even be higher than that now. And that's over 40% of our state budget going back into social services. Now, listen, I'm a good New Yorker. My constituents are good New Yorkers. We want to help people who need assistance temporarily, you know, a helping hand, get them up, you know, but at the same time, this cycle of dependency, you know, of being on social services for 10 and 20 and 30 years has got to stop. We have to retool, make sure we get individuals back to work, provide them skills training. And that's something, as you know, Ted, we've been working on our minority conference. I co-chaired the Learning for Work Task Force to help with our students and adults who want to get skilled trades going forward. And again, and I want to make sure I emphasize this, you know, in terms of the social services budget, I'm okay with making sure we help those in need. Our developmentally disabled, for example, we need to make sure we protect our most vulnerable and people like that. And that is very, very important to me as we go forward, to make sure we examine that area. But if we can shift a lot of those costs and reduce those costs overall for just general social services spending, we'll be able to help provide for a better funding for the developmentally disabled and people who are in need of that. And also with our skilled task force, as I've mentioned before, we have to do that. But the bottom line is the mindset out of New York City and the progressive leadership, self-proclaimed democratic socialists, is just not the way that upstate constituents believe how we should be operating our government. We need to make sure we make real investments for the future that includes in our infrastructure and education. And yes, this budget did that, but only a drop in the bucket compared to the overall spending for these other services. So, Ted, this is an ongoing battle. I voted against the last three budgets in their entirety. The two previous budgets before that, I voted against most of them, particularly the revenue bills, where they threw all the additional spending in. And we need to, as we go forward, to make sure that we reduce taxes, we reduce governmental spending, and we put ourselves on a track to once again be the Empire State, because we are. We've got great people. People want to stay here. They want to invest in here, but they're having a hard time when they look at the out of control spending and the high taxes in New York. They really do a double take and like, we'll have to go to greener pastures in the South, where they are more welcoming. Florida, for example, we saw what happened with the COVID crisis, right? There they have a much different approach on how they do things, and really they've handled it much better, I believe, in the state of Florida overall than we have here in New York. But putting that aside, just the overall economy alone is much stronger down there, and we should look at that model to how we need to do business to return our status as the empire state in the state of New York.
One of the things in Florida they don't have that we have is state income tax, and I think that helps a lot. That's drawing a lot of people. A lot of high earners are going to Florida, and we're losing. You mentioned the population loss. A lot of the people we're losing are people who make good incomes. They're educated people, and they're taking their skills and their money elsewhere.
And what do the downstate driven majorities do in the budget? They increase the level of income tax on those high earners, which I believe do trickle down to the general workforce because they want to employ people here, they want to invest here, they want to help the middle class here. But at the same time, in New York City, they have the highest tax income rate in the entire nation. Just in New York City alone. These folks I know are thinking about moving to Florida and other places where they can get their income tax, either no income tax or much lower income tax, and they're much more welcome there. So anyways, I will continue to work very hard because I know what the people in my district want, and they want reduced taxes, they want reduced fees. For example, the state Democrats who are in charge of the majority in the Senate, they want to increase by 55% the gasoline tax. Well, over this past weekend, now the computers have been hacked, the price of gas are going up dramatically, and now they want to add a 55-cent tax per gallon on that. Let's look at the current gasoline tax. Let's look right now at how much actually goes back into the infrastructure, into our roads now. It's less than 50%. It goes into the general budget. When you start really looking at these things, and I have done that now as a member of the Assembly for the last 5 years, I can tell you it was eye-opening to me when I first got here, and I worked with my colleagues like Assemblyman Phil Palmisano on CHIPS funding and looking at these issues. Folks, we need to reduce spending, reduce taxes, and restore our right as the Empire State. But we're only going to do that by doing those two things.
A couple of numbers here. You mentioned taxes. The recently enacted state budget comes with both a corporate tax hike and a permanent hike on taxing high earners. $3.7 billion in new taxes this year, $4.4 billion next year. So your colleagues across the aisle are not getting the message.
They're not getting the message. And what we need to do is, on the flip side, when you're in your household, right, or in your business, and you're faced with crisis situations, you look at both sides of the ledger. You look at the income side, and you look at the expense side. And, I hear a lot about revenue raisers. You know what they are? Tax hikes. Okay. Revenue raisers are tax hikes. And I hear a lot about that. But when we talk about the other side of the ledger in terms of expenses, where are we going to cut? Or where are we going to prioritize? And that's something that I continue to look at. For example, sometimes you got to make the investment on your house, put on a brand new roof, for example, or fix the gutters that are leaking so it protects the actual building itself. You have to make those investments. That's why I do talk about investing in terms of infrastructure and education, because long term, for decades to come, that's something that I think we have to prioritize and put more dollars into. And on the flip side of the aisle, ledger, for example, on the social services budget, we really need to examine how much are we spending on them, the cycle dependency issues, and finding real reductions also in the areas of fraud and waste, mismanagement, all those things on the other side of the aisle. But unfortunately, I don't hear much from the downstate-driven Democrat majorities and how we're going to address that. So anyways, I will continue to fight hard for those items. and bring our message. And I think you're going to see a change, I believe, in due time, because folks, we can't afford to continue to spend like we are currently right now. And I think people, particularly in the suburbs and maybe in Long Island, they're going to speak up too, and they're going to say, we have to change the direction. We really have to change the direction of how we are operating in the state of New York. And I'm hopeful in due time that we'll see some much needed changes to help the people, particularly of Western New York.
Now, the people you serve, again, in Western New York, you mentioned investment in schools. In this budget, the schools in your district, did they receive adequate funding?
Yeah, they did receive increased funding, and that's something that I was very proud of within the budget. Overall, I did vote against the entire state budget as for the third year in a row to send a message that really enough is enough. But there were good points in the budget. You know, throughout the process, as a member of the Ways and Means Committee, and I, for example, in the Transportation Committee, I had an opportunity to look at those priorities within the budget and fight hard for those. So, for example, on infrastructure, we were able to get an additional $100 million increased CHIPS funding, which goes back into our local roads and bridges. Very, very important. We also maintained the Bridge and Pave New York program with some additional improvements. And those are things that we were able to work on behind the scenes for many months. Unfortunately, many of it was done by Zoom now because of the COVID situation. But we were able to work through those things. And education, for example, as well. Those investments are very, very important. But in terms of the overall budget, when you look at it, particularly in terms of the infrastructure, you know, it's just a drop in the bucket. You know, $100 million compared to a $212 billion budget is really, you know, we need additional funding there because it's an investment. That's the difference. It's an investment, and this will rebuild and revitalize our economy. And when businesses come here, they'll take a look at these things, and it's very, very important.
Sure. Well, the summer months are coming. It doesn't feel like summer out there now. We're in early May, but the summer months are here, and you're working on a swimming bill. Tell us about that. What's that about?
Yes, you know, as part of my district, I represent Lake Ontario for lake towns along the southern shore of Lake Ontario. In Western New York, we have the Niagara River, we have Lake Erie, we have many other swimming areas and pools. This is something that I've been thinking about for a little while since I came to the Assembly, to make sure that we put a focus on our young people, to make sure they get proper swimming instruction at a young age. So I introduced a bill. You know, it's kind of, you learn in the civics class. You get an idea, you put it in. Well, this was one of my ideas. Sometimes I get an idea, Ted, from constituents, and I'll put a bill in with their ideas. So if anyone ever has an idea, certainly reach out to my office at 839-4691. That's 839-4691. I'll always be happy to talk to you about it. But we put in a bill to do a study to provide swimming lessons to our young people, and actually hopefully do private-public partnerships like organizations like the YMCA, for example, because it is hard through our educational program and the investments to like put new pools in and things like that, to maybe work through the public-private partnerships and set up a fund for that. So I have a bill that has a commission that will examine this. I've learned a lot about this, for example, that between 6 months and 18 months, children, babies and toddlers are able to learn very basic skills, how to turn around in the water and things like that. And then from 18 months to 3.5 to 4 years, they're not really capable yet with their motor skills to get a full swim instruction lesson. But after that, they can. So it's good to do both steps. Those initial exposures to the water as early as 2 months, but around 6 months to 18 months. And then after that, to really reduce and prevent childhood drowning and adult drownings long term.
Michael Norris, it's always a pleasure. And again, if you want to get in touch with the Assemblyman, the number is 839-4691. Assemblyman Norris, always good to see you. Keep up the good work.
Great. Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be with you, Ted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Assembly Update. I'm Ted Flint.